We're continuing our look into the life and ministry of Jesus of Nazareth. It's been a great study. So far, we took a look at the crucifixion and then the resurrection, Palm Sunday, Easter Sunday, and ever since then, we've been in chapter 21 of the Gospel of John. John gives us the most information, the most account, post-resurrection on the disciples and Jesus. And so that's where we are, continuing to take a look at what happened until he left and went to sit at the right hand of his Father from the Mount of Olives in the first chapter of Acts. We'll continue to do that in just a moment. Peter is restored, forgiven, reinstated, commissioned as the leader of the disciples in this beautiful story that we have for this morning. We'll take a look at that in just a minute. But as always, before we talk about the Son, let's bow our heads and hearts and let's talk to his Father first. Father, we come before you this morning grateful and thankful that you would allow us to come, that you would meet us in this place because you know each and every one of us. You know the struggle it was for some just to get up and to be here this morning. You know the dirt that we sit here with that's a part of our life. Father, you know all of the stuff that we can't even mention. And even though we don't mention it, you know it anyway. We're transparent before you. You know each and everything that we try and hide from everybody else. And the thing about grace is, the thing that we need to understand, those things don't keep us away from you. In fact, like a magnet, that dirt is what compels us and draws us to you. Because you're the only place where we can receive forgiveness. You're the only place we can get rid of the dirt and the guilt. You're the only place where there's forgiveness and freedom. And so we come before a loving Father as a child who's really blown it. And we lay all of the stuff down on the altar before you. And we ask you, Father, this morning, clean us up. Would you clean us up? We see in this beautiful passage of Scripture how you cleaned Peter up. And so our hope is for the same for our lives. Father, as we open your word, we pray for the one who teaches that you would forgive him his sins, for they are many. We come to this place this morning to see Jesus of Nazareth and Jesus only. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen. John 21, we'll start. Jesus reinstating Peter. Verse 15 down through, we'll go to 19. Follow along with me. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. I tell you the truth, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands." What happens when you're crucified? You stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." Remember, Peter ended up being crucified upside down. If you remember, 3 weeks ago, we opened up our study of John 21 because it was the place where we get the most post-resurrection information about Jesus and his disciples. And we opened chapter 21 with the observation that it seems like an afterthought, an addendum to the first 20 chapters. John adds 2 beautiful stories here about cooking and serving his disciples breakfast on the shore of the Sea of Galilee and reinstating and restoring Peter after his 3 denials the night of Jesus' arrest. And then we looked at 3 reasons why John may have done exactly that. One was to address the heresy that was creeping into the early church. The second, John uses chapter 21 to clear up a rumor that had started and spread about the second coming of Christ. And then thirdly, he uses the chapter to take care of the problem with Peter. Well, what was the problem with Peter? Think for a moment where we last saw Peter before the resurrection. It was in the courtyard of the high priest, the night of Jesus' arrest, where he denied knowing Jesus 3 times, the last time with curses. I don't know the man. Now, what was Peter's problem? Peter's problem was people. People who won't forgive anybody for anything. Peter's problem wasn't Jesus, because Jesus forgave him. Peter's problem was people. Critical and judgmental first century church people who wouldn't let Peter forget about his past. They were going around saying, Peter's a bad, bad sinner. He denied Jesus 3 times when Jesus needed him the most. The last time he denied him, he even cussed. Peter shouldn't be forgiven. Peter shouldn't be an apostle. He shouldn't be the leader of the church. He ought to be ashamed. That's what he ought to be. And so in chapter 21, John addresses the problem with Peter by giving us this beautiful story of Peter's restoration and reinstatement by Jesus. These verses constitute one of the most moving incidents in all of the Bible. And in a very moving and unique and quiet way, Jesus of Nazareth ministers to a man who simply didn't deserve it. Jesus takes the time to get inside the skin of Peter. He takes the time to love him and forgive him and reinstate him. Let me tell you something that I don't fully understand, but I know it's true because I've felt it in my own experience. I've discovered that many times when I've been the most rebellious, the most disobedient and sinful, those are the times when the presence of Jesus Christ in my life is the closest and most overwhelming and real. I've told you about the time that I was traveling out on the road one time, sitting in a hotel room, trying to kill some time one evening till an evening appointment, and I was changing the channels around on the television trying to find something to watch. And I saw this woman who was crying, and she was really crying. You don't see people cry like she was crying on TV. So I left it on to see what she was crying about. And she told a story. The best I can remember, it went like this. She said she was an atheist, that she was born and raised in an atheist family, that she had never held a Bible in her hand, ever. She'd never prayed, not even now I lay me down to sleep. That she had never been in a church building in her life, except one time she went on a trip to Europe and she toured a cathedral. Other than that, she'd never even been in a church. She said she was 36 years old. She had a 12-year-old daughter, and she got word that her daughter had been struck by a car and was in the hospital. She said, I hurried to the hospital to get a prognosis. She said, I found the doctor, and the doctor said, it's not good. Your daughter may be in a coma for the rest of her life, and the rest of her life may only be one day. She said, I went out of that hospital and across the street and into a bar. And she said, I got plastered out of my mind. She said, when I was good and drunk, I got in my car and I began to drive home. She said, I remember it was raining because the windshield wipers were knocking the droplets of water off the windshield. And she said, when I got home, I pulled into my driveway and I turned off the car. And she said, then I began to curse God. She said, I knew how to curse. She said, for a half an hour, I spewed out the venom and the hatred and the cursing at God. And when I was through and I was spent, I was silent. And she said, in that silence, I heard a voice. And the voice said to me, that is the first time you have ever spoken to me. And I love you very much. God has often been that way in my life too. When I've been the most rebellious and disobedient, and when I've kicked and screamed, He's held me the tightest until I quit squirming. And He says to me, son, I love you very, very much. And this story in the 21st chapter of John is an example of Jesus grabbing Peter and holding on to Peter until he quit squirming and saying to Peter, Peter, it's okay. Because, Peter, I love you very, very much. Can you imagine being Peter that night in the courtyard of the high priest? He just told Jesus earlier that evening, I will never disown you. And then he denies Jesus 3 times, the last time with curses. And when he denies that 3rd time, he looks up. And they're bringing Jesus by in shackles. And Peter's eyes meet the eyes of Jesus looking directly at him in the middle of his worst sin ever. Jesus was watching as he made that 3rd denial. I don't know, Jesus of Nazareth. Can you imagine? I can, because I've done it too. And so there's a lot of hope in these verses for those of us who have hurt him the way that Peter hurt him. For those of us who have been rebellious the way that Peter was rebellious. For those of us who have turned away from him the way that Peter turned away from him. But he still comes and he still holds us until we stop squirming, and he still says, I love you very, very much. When I outlined this text, I found 6 specific ways in which Jesus ministers to Peter. But before we look at those, I've got one sore thumb that sticks out of the text that we're going to take a look at on the front end. Sore thumb number 1 and only this morning. I want you to please note Jesus' use of the word love when questioning Peter. Look at verses 15 through 17, the conversation between Jesus and Peter. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The 3rd time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the 3rd time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. Now, you need to know that the Greeks have 4 words that they use specifically in different ways for our one word, love. We have a single word, love. They have 4 words describing 4 different kinds of love. And 2 of those words are used in this text. The first word used by Jesus in his first 2 questions to Peter is agape. And agape love means the highest form of love that we could possibly have. Agape is the perfect love, the unconditional love which God has for us. And Jesus uses the word agape in his first 2 questions to Peter. The second word used in this text for love is philia. And philia means brotherly love, as you would love a good friend. The city of Philadelphia has the root word philia in it, meaning the city of brotherly love. And the word philia denotes friendship and loyalty to that friend. And the word philia is used for Jesus' 3rd question to Peter and for all 3 of Peter's responses to Jesus' questions. So, with that understanding in mind, let me reread this text to you and how it was originally spoken between Jesus and Peter. It went like this. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me with perfect, unconditional love the way that I love you? Yes, Lord, Peter said, you know that I love you as a close friend. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me with perfect, unconditional love the way I love you? Peter answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you as a close friend. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The 3rd time, Jesus said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me as a good friend? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the 3rd time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you as a close friend. Jesus said, feed my sheep. And so do you see what's happening in this text? When we get to the real conversation, in Jesus' first 2 questions to Peter, he says, Peter, do you love me with the highest form of love? The way one ought to love God with devotion and no self-interest at all. The way I love you unconditionally. And then note Peter's answer to all 3 questions. Peter says back to Jesus, Jesus, I'm your friend. I'm just your friend. And then notice in Jesus' 3rd and final question to Peter, Jesus changes the word from agape, the perfect unconditional love, to philia, the brotherly love of a close friend. And he says, Peter, do you love me as a close friend? Peter's answer the 3rd time is, yes, a close friend. You're my friend. Now, with that understanding of the conversation, let's ask the obvious question. Why? Why did Jesus ask Peter the first two times if his love was the highest form of perfect, unconditional love, and the last time he asked Peter, do you love me as a close friend? And why does Peter answer all three times, Jesus, I'm just your friend. I'm just your friend. Do you remember Peter's words? His bold statements the night of Jesus' arrest? Peter pounded his chest like Tarzan, and he said to Jesus in front of all the rest of the disciples, Jesus, if all fall away on account of you, I never will. Matthew 26:33. And then in verse 35 he says, even if I have to die with you, Jesus, I will never disown you. And right after that came his three denials of Jesus. So in our text for this morning, when Jesus says the first two times, Peter, do you love me? Do you really love me with that pure, unconditional love with which I love you? In other words, Peter, do you remember your bold statements of faith the other night? Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. Do you love me that much, Peter? Do you really love me that much that you would die for me? Is your love for me unconditional no matter what? And then Peter remembers his three denials. He remembers his bold statements of faith that night that turned fickle in just moments after he'd made them. And he thinks to himself, Jesus knows. Jesus knows my love for him didn't prove itself. He knows it fell apart. He knows about the denials. And how could I deny him if I really loved him? And so Peter's not about to make another statement that he can't live up to. And so he answers Jesus both times, Jesus, I'm your friend. That's all. I'm not going to say anything more. I'm just your friend. And then the third time, Jesus affirms Peter's real love by changing the word and dropping it from agape, God, to philia, friend. And he says, Peter, are you my friend? Are you at least my close friend, Peter? And Peter is honest and truthful. And he answers again the third time, Jesus, yes, I'm your friend. I'm just your close friend. But I want you to know in his mind and in his heart, Peter's thinking, that's all I am now, Jesus. I'm your friend, but I want to be so much more. I want to mean those words that I said. I will never disown you. I'll even die for you, Jesus. And Peter would die for Jesus, crucified only upside down in the end. Peter's love for Jesus would increase and prove itself unconditional, even unto death. And for each of his three denials, there would be three questions of faith. Peter, do you love me? And three answers of truth. Jesus, you know all things. You know that I love you. And three reinstatements of Peter's original calling. Feed my lambs. Take care of my sheep. Feed my sheep, Peter. Can you identify with Peter here? Whew, man, I can. And if you said no, you lie about other things. Man, I can. I've denied him daily. I've disappointed him daily. Even disrespected him. And he never stopped loving me. He never stopped forgiving me. He never stopped using me. Sometimes we're like Peter. And we pound our chest like Tarzan and we say, not me, Lord. I am strong, faithful. I will never let you down. Right before the biggest failure our life's ever had. And I think it's interesting to know what Jesus calls Peter in this passage. He doesn't call him Peter anymore. What's he calling? All three times. Simon, son of John. That's what he called Peter back in the beginning when they first met 3 years ago. In John 1:42, Andrew brings his brother Simon to Jesus and tells him, we found the Messiah, we found the Christ. And when Jesus sees him, he says, you are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas, which when translated is Peter, which means the rock. Who changed Simon's name to Peter? It was Jesus. Who gave him the name the rock? It was Jesus. And understand that the coming Messiah is referred to as the rock more than once in the Old Testament book of Psalms. And it was Jesus who gave Peter his new name, which means the rock. But he didn't call him Peter the rock in John 21 passage, does he? He calls him Simon, son of John, what he called him back in the beginning. What's that say to us here? Well, some scholars say that it was because Peter was no longer Jesus' rock after his three denials, that he failed Jesus and he didn't deserve the name, the rock, anymore. I don't believe that. I don't believe that Jesus made a mistake naming Peter the rock. I believe that Jesus meant to call him Simon, son of John, what he called him back in the beginning for a reason. It would be like calling General Schwarzkopf Private Schwarzkopf. I mean, it would have been a very humbling moment. But I believe the reason that Jesus called him Simon instead of Peter is because Jesus was trying to teach him something. He was trying to teach him something that he wants us to know too, and it's this: don't ever forget where I found you. Private. Don't ever forget where I found you. And Peter, you weren't Peter the Rock until you met me. And I gave you that name. You were just Simon the fisherman before I found you. And if there's anything in you up and above Simon the fisherman, it's because I put it there. You were Simon in the beginning. I made you into Peter. And without me, you will always be and only be Simon the fisherman. And while Jesus allows us to serve and even puts a calling on our life and gives us everything that we will ever need to fulfill that calling, He shares His glory with no one. Remember that. Don't ever forget where He found you and what you were before He found you. And then there's another thing I want you to note about this text, and it's Jesus' use of the word these. In verse 15, Jesus says, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? Now, we weren't there, and we can only speculate as to what Jesus meant when He said more than these. Some scholars say that as Jesus was talking to Peter, that He pointed to the boat, and He pointed to the nets, and He pointed to the catch of fish there on the ground, and He said to Peter, do you love me more than these things? Meaning your fishing business. Peter, are you willing to give up a successful career, a steady job, a comfortable living in order to give yourself forever to my work and my people? In other words, Peter, are you willing to give up fishing for fish so you can fish for men with the gospel of Jesus Christ? And then some scholars say that Jesus said, Peter, do you love me more than these, meaning the disciples? Do you love me more than you love the rest of these guys? In other words, Jesus is saying, I'm God, and these are just mere men. Do you truly love me more than you love these men? But here's what I believe Jesus meant when He said, do you love me more than these? He really did mean the other disciples, but He meant it in this way. Peter, do you love me more than these men love me? Because that's what Peter professed the night of his denials. Jesus, if all fall away on account of you, meaning the other disciples, I never will. Even if I have to die with you, Jesus, I will never disown you. In other words, Jesus, these turkeys may run off and desert you tonight, but not me. Jesus, I love you more than they do. I'm more loyal and faithful and true. Jesus, I'm your rock. But then we know what happened just a couple of hours later. Peter denied even knowing who Jesus was 3 different times. And so Jesus is saying, Peter, you professed your great love for me. You bragged that you love me more than the rest of my men. We all know what happened that night, Peter. Peter, is your love really greater? Do you truly love me more than these men love me? And realizing what he had done, Peter answers Jesus 3 times, Jesus, I love you, but not like any more than these guys. Jesus, I boasted, I remember that, but I just love you as a close friend. I'm not going to let my mouth get me in trouble again, Jesus. I'm going to tell you the truth this time. Whew. Mind-blowing. Wow. We had a lot of straightforward Bible teaching this morning right there in a row. With very little or no humor and only one story or illustration. So let's change both of those things right now before we end up. We'll cover the 6 points next Sunday morning. I had my second colonoscopy a week before Easter. And you know, at the second, when you learn the colonoscopy, it's not that bad. It's no big deal. It's the preparation the day before that's the killer. Dr. Lee came out after it was over to talk to Love, tell her everything was fine, and he said, tell Bill he did a great job of cleaning out his colon. She just nodded. She didn't have the heart to tell him he's on day 35 of a 40-day fast. He hadn't eaten in 35 days. It wasn't because of you that he cleaned himself out. And of course, with my curiosity and my control issues, I chose to stay awake and watch it on the screen. You know, in Arkansas, Dr. Lee and I would be legally married after these last 2 encounters we've had. I felt like we were I was a little kid on a long road trip. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Hey, Doc, let me know if you find my dignity. And when he was through, I said, Dr. Lee, could you write a note for my wife verifying that my head is not really up there? Like she's... But here's what I really want to know. How did all this get started? Who was the first person to come up with this idea? I mean, who was the guy sitting at his workbench that said, well, I got a little camera here, and I got 15 feet of video cable. Hey, I got an idea. Bob, come over here. Lay down on your stomach. I mean, who was the first person to think that up and give it a try? Do you ever wonder who the first disciple was who witnessed for Christ and shared the gospel story after they put it all together, understood what it was all about? I guarantee you anything that it was Peter. Because Peter literally lived the gospel story. He committed the sin. He saw the cross and the crucifixion. He witnessed the empty tomb. And he was personally forgiven and reinstated and restored by Jesus himself in John 21. And when you experience forgiveness and you feel that kind of love, you don't want it to stop with you. You want to pass it around so others can feel that forgiveness and that love. And there's a world of people out there who just need to hear that somebody loves them. And brothers and sisters in Christ, it's our job as the body of Christ to love them and forgive them and to restore them like Jesus did to Peter. Love and I have counseled people all of our lives with emotional scars because they never heard their parents say, I love you to them. I told a man at the Orient Road Jail in Tampa that I loved him, and a look of shock came over his face, and he said, no one's ever said that to me before. And I've even ministered to people on their deathbeds before who lived their entire lives without somebody saying, I love you to them. Why? Why did they have to live their entire life without anybody saying, I love you to them? When that's what we as Christians have been commanded to do, to love one another. Love your neighbor as yourself. They will know that we are Christians because we love them when nobody else will love them. I'm not talking about repeating 3 little words, I love you. Love is not about speaking it, it's about doing something about it. Open your eyes this week, Christian. Look out at those who pass you by every day. And as the broker of God's love on this planet, see if you don't hear them saying to you, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Let me finish with this.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. God commands an action, not a feeling. Love is something we decide to do. Jesus asked Peter, do you love me?
I'm having an abortion. Do you love me?
Do you love me?
I cheated on my wife. Do you love me?
Do you love me?
Do you love me? I'm an addict. Do you love me?
I'm struggling with my sexuality. Do you love me?
Do you love me?
I love money. Do you love me?
Do you love me?
Do you love me?
Do you really love me?
If you love me, tend my sheep. I tell you the truth. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. Do you love me?
Let's pray. Father, I pray that you'll let us go out of here reminding us that that's our command, that's our purpose as the family of God, to tell the world that we love them. We belong to you and you love us, so we have to tell them that we love them so they'll know that love too. And so let us listen very, very intently with great Holy Spirit sensitivity today and tomorrow and every day this week to the people that we're passing by and listen for that question as they look at us with that blank stare. And they may not even say it out loud, but we'll hear it anyway, just through the way that they look. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And then we'll remember the story of Peter, and at the time that he betrayed you the worst, you loved him the most. And that sin just compelled your love to him. And let it do the same with those that we meet this week. That's our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.